Here's a thought to start us off. What if the person you truly believe yourself to be, maybe it doesn't actually exist, not in the way you imagine anyway. Like, what if your memories, your likes and dislikes, even your own name, what if it's all just data? Constantly flowing, shifting, reconfiguring inside this huge dynamic system. Today, we're doing a deep dive into something pretty profound, this concept of no self, and how understanding it might radically change how we see personal freedom and maybe even suffering. So our mission here is to try and unpack why this deep-seated attachment we have, this clinging to the idea of a fixed, unchanging self, might actually be the hidden root of a lot of our struggles. And we'll explore how letting go of that rigid idea could potentially unlock this incredible, really liberating sense of freedom. We're going to pull insights from a couple of fascinating sources, one called No Self, The Path to Freedom from Suffering, and another looking at the Matrix, the illusion of self.
Yeah, those are great sources for this.
Exactly. And the best part, we're going to talk about this in plain English. No complex jargon, nothing obscure.
Keep it accessible.
Totally. We'll even use The Matrix, the movie as a kind of lens. It helps visualize how these big ideas actually play out in a way that feels, well, surprisingly relatable. So as we go through this, keep this question in mind for yourself. Who is the one listening right now? Who is this you that feels so central, so undeniably there in your experience?
Okay, let's unpack this a bit, because for a lot of people, especially maybe in the West, this whole no-self idea, it sounds kind of scary, right?
It really does. Yeah.
Almost like nihilism, like it's saying nothing matters, you don't matter, can feel a bit bleak. Why do you think that initial reaction is so strong?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it, how much that idea of a fixed, unchanging you is just baked into everything. It's our default setting. But the core insight from the sources, especially no self, is that the self isn't this stable, solid thing. It's much more like a river,
Okay. Yeah, like a continuous flow of experiences.
Yeah.
Always shifting, never exactly the same twice. It's not a noun, a thing you are, but more like
Well, the source calls it a dynamic bundle of processes.
a bundle of processes. What does that actually mean? Like, what's in the bundle?
Right, so the source breaks it down. Think about the core components making up our experience, moment to moment. First, there's your physical form, your body. Always changing, right? Cells replacing themselves.
Okay, yeah, constantly.
Then you have sensations, just raw input like warmth, cold, pressure, fleeting things that just arise and pass. After that comes perception. That's how your mind interprets those sensations. It labels them. Chair, sound, itch.
Kind of giving it meaning.
Exactly. Then there are mental formations. This is a big one. Include your thoughts, your intentions, habits, memories, biases, all that internal chatter. Again, constantly arising and fading.
Wow, okay. And finally, there's consciousness itself. Just that basic awareness that seems to witness all of this. But the key point, the absolute kicker, is that all of these things are always in flux. There's no permanent core that stays the same underneath it all.
So no fixed watcher behind the screen.
That's the idea. No permanent watcher pulling the strings.
Yeah.
It's more like the screen and the movie are constantly interacting and changing together. It's really an illusion of continuity. And the Matrix analogy works so well here. Neo finds out his whole world is a simulation, right?
Yeah, the big reveal.
But then, take it a step further. If the world is a construct, what about the Neo he thinks he is? His identity, his memories, his choices? Could they also just be part of the simulation's programming, a construction of the system?
Huh. I never quite thought of it that deeply.
It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? And this brings up a question for you, listening. If everything that makes up your sense of you is constantly changing, never totally static, what does that imply about the you that feels so solid day to day? How much of that feeling of solidity is just, well, a really convincing story you keep telling yourself?
Okay, so if the self isn't this fixed thing, if it's more like this flowing river, these processes, then why does believing it is fixed cause us so much trouble? It sounds kind of philosophical, but you're saying the sources connect this directly to actual suffering. How does that work? How does believing in a fixed self lead to real pain or distress?
Yeah, that's the crucial link. The sources are pretty clear. A huge chunk of our suffering comes directly from clinging to the illusion of a fixed self.
Clinging. Okay. Clinging to what exactly?
Well, think about it. We cling to our identity, right? Who we think we are, our job title, our role in the family, our political views, our personality traits. I am this kind of person.
Right. We define ourselves.
We do. And we cling to permanence. We want things to stay the same, especially the good things. We resist change, even though change is the only constant. We want ourselves to stay the same, or at least the parts we like.
And control.
and definitely control. We have this deep-seated belief that we should be able to manage everything, our feelings, other people, life circumstances, outcomes, and all these types of clinging, all these attachments, they're built on that fundamentally shaky idea of a stable, unchanging I who needs these things to be a certain way.
Can you give some everyday examples of that?
Sure. Think about how much energy we pour into defending our online image, right? Or how fiercely we defend an opinion in an argument, even when deep down we sense it might be flawed. That's the I protecting itself.
Yeah, okay. I see that.
Or the frustration when your career doesn't go exactly as you planned it, because that I is clinging to a very specific future story. Think about resisting aging, or the intense pain when the I fights against the reality of losing someone we love. That resistance is the suffering, in large part. The sources really highlight how much of our day-to-day stress, from little annoyances right up to deep despair, comes from these attachments. Attachments to who we think we are, personal stories, how we think things should be, instead of just dealing with how they actually are. It's this constant battle against impermanence, all to prop up a self that isn't even solid to begin with.
Wow, that paints a really clear picture of the problem. But, okay, here's where it gets really interesting for me. If clinging to this fixed self causes suffering, what happens when we start to loosen that grip, when we let go? The sources talk about a profound shift, like flipping a switch. They say a different kind of freedom opens up, and they describe it as the freedom from being someone. That sounds weirdly paradoxical, doesn't it? Don't we usually want to be someone?
It absolutely sounds paradoxical,
Mm.
but it's a beautiful paradox, and it points towards something genuinely liberating. Just imagine for a second, if there's truly no one to defend, no specific image or identity you have to constantly protect, and no ego to inflate, no need to prove you're right or important, think of the sheer energy that frees up.
A lot of energy, probably.
A ton. The sources emphasize that if you're not constantly busy reinforcing, protecting, or justifying this fixed idea of yourself, you become incredibly flexible,
Yeah.
lighter, more responsive to life as it actually happens, moment by moment. That constant pressure to perform, to maintain the facade, it just dissolves.
Okay, I'm starting to see it. How does the Matrix analogy fit here?
Yeah, the Matrix shows this so vividly. Remember when Neo starts to really get it? It's not when he's just fighting harder as Neo, the individual person. It's when he stops fighting as a person and starts moving as the Matrix itself.
Right, when he sees the code.
Exactly. And what does that look like? He's not resisting anymore, not trying to micromanage every single move. He's flowing with the system. He understands its rules so deeply, he can bend them, operate within them effortlessly.
That's when he becomes the one.
Precisely. And notice how he becomes the one. It's not by asserting a stronger, tougher self. It's by transcending the limits of his perceived individual identity. He lets go of being just Neo.
Okay.
So if we connect that back to our own lives, think about how much mental and emotional bandwidth we use up every single day defending who we are, defending our beliefs, our past choices, our desires, even our limitations. Oh, I could never do that. What if all that energy could be redirected
Redirected how?
towards just living more fully, with more acceptance, responding skillfully to life as it is right now, rather than constantly comparing it to how our fixed self thinks it should be?
That makes sense, especially seeing Neo just flow with the system instead of fighting it head on. But, okay, this leads to a really deep question the sources bring up. A paradox. If there's no fixed self, if this I we feel is ultimately an illusion, then who awakens? Who experiences this freedom you're talking about? If there's no me to begin with, how can I get enlightened or find freedom?
That's the question, isn't it? And it's where a lot of confusion comes in. The sources are quite clear on this. Awakening doesn't happen to someone.
Okay.
Instead, it happens through the dissolving of someone. It's not about adding something like enlightenment to your existing self. It's not about becoming a better or more spiritual version of you.
So it's not accumulation.
No, quite the opposite. The sources say it's not by becoming more, but by being less.
Less. Less what?
Less attached.
Right.
Less separate, feeling less like an isolated island and more connected to everything, less certain of the I, less identified with that fixed story. It's really a process of unburdening,
Yeah.
like shedding layers of rigid identity that we've built up rather than trying to polish the statue underneath.
Okay, unburdening, dissolving. I get that conceptually. How does this relate to something like free will? That feels like the ultimate expression of self. I choose.
Free will. Yeah, this perspective really shifts how we look at that too. The sources propose something pretty radical, that what we experience as free will might actually be, and this is their term, a post hoc illusion.
Post hoc, meaning after the fact.
Exactly, like a thought doesn't pop into your head because you decided, okay, time to think this specific thought now. It just arises, doesn't it?
Yeah, thoughts definitely disappear sometime.
And decisions, desires. The sources suggest they aren't always initiated by some central CEO, you making a conscious command. Instead, they arise, conditioned by countless causes and effects. Think about all the things that feed into a choice. Your upbringing, past experiences, your mood right now, what you ate for breakfast, the article you just read. It's this massive web of influences.
So it's not this isolated moment of pure choice.
It seems less like that, and more like the culmination of everything that came before. It's very much like The Matrix again. Was Neo's choice to take the red pill really a spontaneous act of free will? Or was it the inevitable outcome given who he was, his dissatisfaction, Morpheus's influence? Basically, the entire system, inside and out, leading him to that point. The source says the system inside and out made him choose.
Wow. That really reframes it.
It does. But crucially, this doesn't mean we're just mindless puppets. It's not fatalism. It's more about seeing the bigger picture, the vast, interconnected web of conditions that gives rise to everything, including our thoughts, feelings, and actions. And gaining that clarity, seeing things as they actually are, impermanent, interdependent, constantly changing, rather than through the filter of our imagined fixed self that's explicitly not nihilism.
Right. It's not saying nothing matters.
Quite the opposite. It suggests everything is deeply interconnected and constantly influencing everything else, including us. Which raises another important question for you, the listener, to ponder. If your choices, and even your sense of identity, arise dependently, shaped by so many conditions, how does that shift your perspective on things like personal responsibility? Or even on who you fundamentally think you are?
This has been, yeah, truly a mind-bending deep dive. It really challenges some of our most fundamental assumptions about ourselves. The core message, weaving through both sources, seems to be that ultimate freedom doesn't come from trying harder to be someone you know, smarter, stronger, more successful, more enlightened. It actually begins when we stop trying to be someone altogether. It's not about building up the self, but about allowing that rigid idea of me to dissolve.
Letting go of the effort involved in maintaining it.
Exactly. And The Matrix, as these sources help us see, wasn't just cool sci-fi about fighting robots. It was always a mirror held up to our deepest assumptions.
About reality itself.
Assumptions about what's real. Assumptions about who we think we are. And, maybe most importantly, assumptions about the kind of freedom that starts. Well, when we finally stop trying so damned hard to be someone. So, are you the one listening right now? Maybe. But perhaps not because you're special or chosen. Maybe it's just because, fundamentally, there's no one else to be. What really stood out to you from all this? How might your own feeling about yourself shift, even just a little, after hearing these ideas? Something to reflect on. We really encourage you to explore these questions in your own experience. See what resonates. Until next time, wake up gently. And maybe question everything.